Hello, fourth graders. This is Mrs. Clausen, and I'm excited to be teaching you today about primary sources and how we can use that to better understand what's happened in history. Those of you who are my students know this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm really excited today to teach you how primary sources can help us understand the past much better. So I want you to take a moment to think about, just recap for yourself, what a primary source is. So in class, we've had many discussions of primary versus secondary sources. So when we're thinking of something that is in record that happened in the past, that is a primary source, whether it be a letter or a speech or a photograph. If it has taken place during that time and we have record of it today, that's a primary source. If an event that happened in the past is retold by an author in an article or in a different form, that's a secondary source. And we often have debates on primary versus secondary, but what I love about primary sources is there's no bias and it's from the past, and it really shows you what happened during that time period. And I hope what we do today will help you better understand the historical period of the book that you are reading about in your book club and how to analyze that time. So today we're going to be practicing this with Number the Stars. I know that you may put Post-it notes in your books and fill that with notes when you're reading. When I'm reading, I may tuck a newspaper article or a photograph or a map and anything that helps me get in my book more. And I'm going to show you this picture on the screen. It's of King Christian V of Denmark riding his horse Jubilee through the streets of Copenhagen. It was taken in 1940. I bet you know who it is. It's King Christian V of Denmark and his horse Jubilee. When we were reading about the king riding Jubilee through Copenhagen, I thought, really? Riding a horse through the city? There's no way I could picture one of our presidents riding a horse through the city, especially a city occupied by the enemy. So I'm going to show you how readers use images to understand a story more deeply. Right now, we are talking about the way a photograph can enrich reading, and you'll see how the photograph helps us envisioning. But keep in mind, other materials like a timeline, a map, or a video could help too, as I use this photograph to help my reading. Will you do similar thinking alongside me? Then you can compare the ways you and I think between this photograph and Number the Stars. So I'm thinking, what part of the novel does this go with? Aren't you? It reminds me the part of the book when Anne Marie is telling Christy about the king. I remember wondering what the king really looked like. King Christian, and this is a part I'm going to read to you from the book. King Christian was a real human being, a man with a serious, kind face. Each morning he had come from the palace on his horse, Jubilee, and ridden alone through the streets of Copenhagen, greeting his people. When I first read this, I pictured a big, strong horse with big feathers in his mane, sort of a fairy tale horse. I tried to picture the king. I thought he would wear a crown and a cape like superhero. The first thing I'm thinking is whether the picture fits with what I had been thinking. So I had been picturing a fairy tale man and his horse and feathers and capes galloping through the dark sea, like Prince Valiant. But the first thing I noticed in this photo is how real it looks and how serious. In the foreground, in the front, there is this tall, serious man riding a big horse. And no, the horse doesn't have feathers, but he is a big, strong horse. He looks proud. So next, I'm going to try to look at the details in case they help me understand the facts of the time. Behind the man on the horse in the background, I'm seeing other people who look like ordinary people. There's even a girl here on the right side trying to pedal a bicycle along the side Jubilee. It's almost like a parade. I also try to understand people's experiences and their perspectives. So what am I learning? Danish people riding bikes. Also, they don't have guards separating the king from the people. I can see why Anne Marie likes King Christian so much, can't you? No wonder the Danish people loved him. He looks admirable. With all his people following along behind him, that's how I'll picture when I picture King Christian and Jubilee. Did you see how I first thought about the picture, how it reminded me of the book? I even went back to the actual page of the book to remind myself what I read and how this picture could fit into the story. Then I compared what I had been picturing before looking at this image to what I actually see in this image. I took my time, I looked at the detail at things and all the parts of the picture. Finally, I thought about how this picture changed my perception of things. In this case, it made me admire King Christian more and understand why Anne Marie and her people loved him so much. So this is kind of what I did. This is just to recap what I did. And if you have your notebook and would like to take notes on this, you can. So what I did is I first asked, what part of the novel do outside sources fit with? Then I asked, what part of the novel raises questions? Then I studied it. I studied the big parts and the details. Then I asked, does this part fit with what I know or add to it? So you also, this is something that you can look at, and when you're looking at primary sources, it helps you to think of what can I focus on? How can I use a primary source to help understand what happened in history much better? And so this gives you kind of how-to of how I did that and how I modeled that for you and how you will be able to do that as well. So we're going to practice that again with another picture from Number the Stars. So there are probably millions of images you can think of that might help us picture Copenhagen during the war. This one is of Copenhagen once the Germans came. It shows tanks rolling into this gentle city. So why don't you take a moment to study the image and think of what you notice, or turn and tell your parent or your pet sitting next to you. Remember to ask these questions. And by these questions, I mean on this page of synthesizing nonfiction images and text into stories. So this can help you at this time. If you want to pause the lesson to do that, you may do so. So I'm sure many of you talked about how scary and dangerous this picture looks. This picture really helps us imagine how terribly brave Anne Marie's family and Peter and her sister are. They're fighting against tanks. So I hope you guys got the ways to how to analyze a primary source much better. And just in a moment, I am going to show you how you can look up primary sources from the historical era that you're reading about from your book club book. Your main assignment is to do whatever book club assignment you have for that for this week. And then I am going to show you on my screen if you would like to explore primary sources from your historical era that you're reading about in your book club book. Thanks for listening, and I hope you got some great tools on analyzing primary sources.